"You must sacrifice your manhood," she said, her voice cold. "Give it to the ritual, and you will have wealth beyond measure. But once you make the sacrifice, you will never be the same." Now let's go back to how it all started. But before then, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to keep you updated. In a small town of Odo, 5 men lived in poverty. They were childhood friends who had grown up together, played together, and shared dreams. But as they reached adulthood, their lives had become a struggle. Uche, Sunday, Chidi, Obinna, and Olamide worked hard every day, but it was never enough. They toiled in the farms, carried heavy loads, and worked as laborers for the wealthy traders who passed through their little town. But no matter how hard they worked, they could never escape the endless cycle of poverty. They had nothing to show for their effort but aching muscles and empty stomachs. One day, while they sat under the shade of a tree, complaining about their miserable lives, Olamide spoke up. "I have heard stories of a witch doctor in the town of Umu," he said, his eyes gleaming. "They say she can make you rich. She can perform a ritual and give you everything you've ever wanted." The others looked at Olamide with curiosity, unsure of what to make of his words. Olamide was the most daring of them all, and he often spoke of things that seemed too good to be true. But this time, his words stirred something inside them. "Where is the witch doctor?" Uche asked, his voice filled with hope. "She lives far away in Umu," Olamide replied, "but she is known for making men rich beyond their wildest dreams. We could go there together." The others exchanged glances. They had nothing to lose. If there was even the smallest chance that they could change their lives, they were willing to take it. The 5 friends set off early the next morning, their hearts filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they were desperate. Their journey took them through thick and thin, across rivers and over hills. Days passed, and the heat of the sun and the exhaustion from walking for hours took its toll. As they arrived in Umu, the town seemed peaceful, but there was a sense of mystery in the air. They made their way to the witch doctor's hut, a small building on the edge of town. The entrance was covered with thick vines, and the air smelled of incense and herbs. They knocked on the door, and a woman with a hooded cloak answered. Her eyes glowed in the dim light, and she looked at each of them with an intense gaze. "What do you seek?" she asked in a voice that sent chills down their spines. "We seek wealth," Olamide answered boldly. The 5 young men exchanged nervous glances, but desperation outweighed their fear. They nodded in unison. "We are willing," they said. The witch doctor smiled, revealing sharp teeth. She led them into a small room where a table was covered with strange symbols and offerings. Candles flickered in the corners, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of incense. The witch doctor began chanting in a language none of them understood. She moved her hands in a rhythmic pattern, and the room seemed to grow colder. "Each of you will be granted a wish," she said. "But know this, nothing comes without a price." She turned to the first man, Uche. "You will live for 5 more years," the witch doctor declared. "During this time, you will have great wealth, but after 5 years, your life will end. That is the price." Uche's heart raced, but he was too desperate to care. 5 years of wealth? It was more than he could even imagine. The witch doctor turned to Sunday. "You must never sleep in a house," she said. "If you do, you will never wake up. But for as long as you live outside, you will be rich." Sunday nodded, even though the idea of never sleeping in a bed sounded terrifying. But wealth was worth the sacrifice, he thought. Next, she turned to Chidi. "You must never take a bait," she said. "If you do, you will die. But as long as you remain filthy, your wealth will grow." Chidi shuddered at the thought of staying dirty forever. But the lure of wealth was too strong. The witch doctor then addressed Obinna. "You must never give money or help to any of your family member," she said. "If you do, you will die. But as long as you keep them out of your wealth, you will remain prosperous." Obinna's heart sank, but he knew he had no choice. His family had struggled for so long, but now he had a chance to escape poverty forever. Finally, he turned to Olamide. "You must sacrifice your manhood," she said, her voice cold. "Give it to the ritual, and you will have wealth beyond measure. But once you make that sacrifice, you will never be the same." Olamide hesitated, but the promise of wealth overshadowed his fears. He agreed, and so the pact was made. The witch doctor performed the rituals, and the young men felt a strange power surge into them. They were bound to the price they had agreed to pay. When the young men returned to Odo, they were no longer the poor laborers they had once been. They were now rich, beyond their wildest dreams. Uche bought a mansion. Sunday built a grand house. Chidi bought fine clothes, and Obinna began sending money to distant lands for development and buying of landed properties. Olamide, though, was the wealthiest of them all, with money flowing into his hands from every direction. The town were amazed at their sudden rise in wealth. People came from far and wide for their help, but the young men turned them away, knowing the cost of the price they had to pay. For a while, everything seemed perfect. The 5 young men lived in luxury, enjoying everything they had ever dreamed of. But as time passed on, the cost of their wealth began to weigh heavily on them. Uche was the first to feel the effect of this pact. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw his own reflection growing older. The lines on his face deepened. He had everything he could want, but the thought of losing it all in 5 years haunted him really bad. He spent his days in luxury, but the fear of death loomed over him. 5 years seemed like a long time, but every passing day reminded him of the price he had to pay. Uche began to withdraw from his friends, isolating himself in his mansion. The thought of dying young, with so much wealth to leave behind, troubled him deeply. Sunday's course was just as difficult. He could never sleep in a house, and though he had tried to find comfort in the open air, his mind and body grew weary. He could no longer find rest. The nights were long, and the lack of sleep made him feel weak. He had all the money he could ever need, but his body was breaking down. His mind was becoming clouded with exhaustion, and he could feel the cost taking its toll. Sunday tried to ignore the signs, but the weight of the cost was undeniable. Chili's cause was perhaps the hardest to bear. He could never take a bath, and the feels that clung to him made him feel repulsive. His skin began to itch, and sores developed where his skin had been left unwashed for too long. But his wealth continued to grow. He had everything he could want, but the condition of his body made him feel as though he was rotting from the inside out. Chili tried to find a way out, but he knew there was no way. He had made the pact, and now he had to live with the consequences. Obinna's cause was also painful. He could never give money or help to his family, and every time he saw them suffering, it tore at his heart. His family had always been there for him, but now they were nothing more than strangers. The wealth he had acquired was useless in the face of his loneliness. He couldn't share his wealth with people who mattered most. His wealth had built walls between him and his loved ones. Obin began to question whether it was worth it. But it was too late. The price has been paid. Olamide's sacrifice had been the most extreme. He had given up his manhood, and though his wealth continued to grow, a part of him felt lost. Feeling the emptiness inside him never went away. He had everything he could desire, but there was a part of him that would never return. He felt like a shadow of himself, unable to connect with others in a meaningful way. The 5 young men, once filled with ambition and dreams of wealth, found themselves facing the consequences of their choices. The first to die was Uche. His 5 years were up, and as the witch doctor had promised, his life came to an end. He had lived in luxury, but in the end, it was all for nothing. He had lived with the shadow of death hanging over him, and when it came, it was swift. The others mourned his passing, but deep down, they knew his death was a result of the pact they had all made. And so, the deaths began. As the days dragged on, Sunday's health continued to deteriorate. He had become a shadow of the man he once was. No matter how much wealth he had accumulated, his ability to sleep in a house was slowly destroying him. He tried sleeping in makeshift tents under the stars, but his body had grown weak. His mind too was clouded with exhaustion, and he found it hard to focus on anything. His friends tried to help him, but nothing seemed to work. He had chosen wealth over rest, and now his body was paying the price. One fateful night, as Sunday lay under the open sky, his breathing became shallow. The wind howled around him, and the chill of the night seeped deep into his bones. Despite the layers of blanket he had wrapped himself in, he could not escape the cold. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, hoping for a moment of rest. But when he opened them again, it was too late. His heart had stopped beating, his body cold and still. The curse had claimed him. His friends found his lifeless body the next morning, and the loss hit them like a blow. But they knew deep down that the price of their wealth was finally taking its toll. Chili's curse was proving just as unbelievable. The sores on his body had gone and spread everywhere, and the stench of his unwashed skin filled the air wherever he went. His friends tried to encourage him to find a solution, but there was nothing that could cure the deep decay inside him. Despite all his wealth, Chili could no longer enjoy the luxuries he had acquired. His wealth couldn't heal his body, and it certainly couldn't cleanse him. The more he resisted beating, the worse his condition became. One day, while sitting in his mansion, feeling the weight of his curse pressed down on him, Chidi suddenly began to curse violently. Blood splattered from his mouth, staining his clothes. He staggered to his feet, but his body was too weak to support him. As he collapsed on the floor, his vision blurred, and he realized that this was the end. The curse had finally claimed him. His body had begun to rot from the inside out, and no amount of wealth could stop it. The others found him hours later, his body lifeless and still, the rich fabrics of his clothes stained with blood. The loss of Chidi was another painful reminder of the price that they had paid. Obinna too had begun to feel the heavy burden of his curse. He had everything: money, power, and influence, but he could never help his family. Every time he saw his relatives in need, it ate away at his heart. His wealth had built a wall between him and the people that mattered most. He had not seen his parents or siblings in months. The last time he spoke to them, they had begged for help, but Obinna had turned them away. He couldn't help them, no matter how much it hurt. The curse bound him to his decision. One day, while walking through the town, Obinna was approached by a young girl who happens to be his cousin. She was crying, and in her hand she held a letter. "Please," she begged, "my mother is dying. She needs money for medicine. Can you help us?" Obinna felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He reached into his pocket, ready to give her money. But then, the weight of his curse hit him like a ton of brick. He could not help her. With a heavy heart, he turned away and continued walking. But as he did, a sudden pain gripped him. His chest raised, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The curse had caught up with him. He had defied it, even for a moment, and it was his undoing. The other men arrived too late, and Obinna was gone. Olamide's curse had been the most extreme of them all. He had sacrificed his manhood for wealth. But the more money he acquired, the more he felt empty inside. His body was no longer his own, and he could never escape the feeling of loss that haunted him. He had everything he could ever want: land, houses, expensive cars, fine clothes, but the sacrifices he had made left him feeling hollow. No matter how much wealth flowed into his hands, the emptiness inside him never went away. One evening, as Olamide sat alone in his mansion, staring out of the window, he heard a voice whisper his name. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Olamide, you will never be whole again," the voice said, and it seemed to come from deep within his own mind. He clutched his head in pain, but the voice continued. "You gave up your manhood, and now you are a shell of a man. There is no escaping the emptiness inside you." As the night wore on, Olamide felt a strange sensation creeping over him. His heart began to race, and his vision blurred. It was as though the very air around him had turned thick and heavy. In the early hours of the morning, the friends found him collapsed in his study. His face was twisted in agony, and his once vibrant eyes were dull and lifeless. The curse had claimed him, just as it had claimed the others. With 4 of the 5 young men dead, only one remained, Obinna, the man who had been the last to suffer from the curse. He had grown into a powerful, influential figure in town, and he had started to feel the weight of his success. But as the death toll among his friends grew, the reality of the price he had paid began to sink in. Obinna knew his time was running out. The whispers of death seemed to follow him everywhere, and every time he looked in a mirror, he saw the consequences of his actions. One day, as he walked through his mansion, he suddenly felt dizzy. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the floor. His head spun. The room seemed to close in around him. As he lay there, struggling for breath, he realized that he had no one left. His friends were gone, and now he was alone. The curse had claimed them all, and soon it would claim him too. The last breath he took was heavy, and his body went still. News of the deaths of the 5 young men spread quickly through the town. Their once vibrant businesses, mansions, and wealth became reminders of the terrible price they had to pay. The town spoke of the young men in hushed whispers, telling stories of their sudden rise to riches and their equally sudden fall from grace. Some believed it was a punishment from the gods. Others said it was a warning to anyone who dared to seek wealth through dark. Their families mourned them, but there was no escaping the truth. They had all paid the price for their greed. As the town of Odo grappled with the deaths of the 5 young men, they began to wonder whether they too were living under a curse. The town spoke of a strange event that had occurred in years before the men's death, how their fortunes had changed, how their behaviors had shifted. Some feared that the curse would spread to the rest of the town. Others took it as a warning to never seek wealth through dark rituals, no matter how desperate they became. In the end, the town of Odo was left to heal, the scars of greed and death leaving an indelible mark on its people. Months later, the witch doctor who had made the pact with the young men returned to the town of Odo. She walked through the streets with a sense of calm, as though nothing had happened. She was the same woman who had promised them wealth in exchange for their souls. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she surveyed the destruction that had unfolded because of her rituals. She had made her money, and she knew that there would always be those desperate enough to seek her out. But she was not bothered by the deaths. In fact, it was part of the cycle. The town of Odo would never forget the story of the youngest billionaires, who had risen to power through a dangerous pact. Their tragic deaths were a reminder of the high cost of greed and ambition. Though the witch doctor had vanished, the whispers of her powers lingered in the air, and the curse, though seemingly broken, continued to haunt the town in the minds of those who dared to seek shortcut to success. The town learned a valuable lesson. There was no easy path to wealth, and the price of ambition could be more than one could bear. Years later, the story of the 5 young men were still told as a cautionary tale. The town of Odo had moved on, but the memory of their rise and fall remained in the hearts of those who remembered. As time passed, the lesson became clearer. Wealth earned through dark means could never bring true happiness, and the price of greed was always too high to pay. And so, the town of Odo continued, wiser and more cautious, knowing that wealth earned through darkness always comes with a heavy price. Thank you for watching till the end. Feel free to go through my channel for more exciting stories.